The morning my son threw the paternity results across the hospital room, I watched my daughter-in-law's face go completely still. Not the stillness of guilt, the stillness of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for the truth to finally speak for itself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from where it really began, because the ending only makes sense if you understand just how carefully the lie had been constructed and by whom. My name is Margaret. I am 64 years old, and I have spent the last 3 years wondering how my family fell apart so completely, so quietly, and so deliberately. I raised my son Gregory alone after his father passed. I worked double shifts at a textile company for 18 years so Gregory could go to a good college, wear clean clothes, and never feel the particular shame of not having enough. I gave him everything I had, which is perhaps why it took me so long to see what he had become. Gregory met Claire at work. She was 31, a bookkeeper at a mid-sized logistics company in Cincinnati, and she had the kind of quiet steadiness that I recognized immediately as strength. Not the loud, performative kind, the kind that holds still under pressure. I loved her from the first dinner. She brought a homemade peach pie and asked me 3 questions about my life that no one had asked me in years. I told Gregory that night, privately, that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He smiled and said he knew. They married in the fall. A small ceremony, outdoor, near a creek, just outside the city. Claire wore her grandmother's earrings and cried when she said her vows. Gregory looked proud in the way men sometimes look proud when they have won something they are not entirely sure they deserve. The first year was fine. The second year was when Gregory's brother, my younger son Dennis, moved back to Cincinnati. Dennis had spent his 30s moving between cities, working in real estate, borrowing money he never quite returned, charming people until he had exhausted their goodwill, and then finding somewhere new to start again. I loved Dennis the way you love a child who has always been slightly out of reach, with worry threaded through every feeling. He was handsome and easy to be around, and he had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room, right up until the moment he needed something from you. When he moved back, Claire was polite to him, friendly even. She invited him to dinners, remembered details he mentioned in passing, treated him with the same warmth she gave everyone. Dennis responded to this the way he responded to most kindness, by looking for the angle. I did not see it at first. I was just glad my boys were in the same city again. Claire became pregnant 8 months after Dennis arrived. She and Gregory had been trying for almost a year, and when she called me with the news, she was crying with joy. I sat in my kitchen and cried with her. Gregory took her to dinner and came home talking about names and nurseries and whether the spare room got enough light. For about 6 weeks, everything was the best it had ever been. Then Dennis started. It was subtle, the way poison usually is. A comment here, a question there. Nothing you could point to directly and say, that is a lie. He mentioned once over a Sunday dinner that he had run into Claire at a coffee shop downtown on a Tuesday afternoon. Said it casually, between bites of bread. Gregory nodded. I thought nothing of it. Claire worked flexible hours. She was often downtown, but Dennis mentioned it again 2 weeks later. Not the same incident, a different one, another sighting. Another casual observation slipped into conversation, and slowly, like a picture coming into focus, I began to understand what Dennis was doing. He was building something, brick by brick, incident by incident. He was building a case. I said nothing. I told myself I was misreading it. Dennis could be thoughtless and careless, but deliberately cruel to his own brother's pregnant wife. I couldn't make myself believe it, not yet. Gregory changed around month 4 of Claire's pregnancy. He became quieter at the edges, watchful. He stopped reaching for her hand at the table. I noticed, because I had always noticed that detail, the easy physical comfort between them that told me they were genuinely close. When it disappeared, the absence was loud. I pulled Gregory aside one evening when Claire was in the kitchen. I asked him directly if something was wrong. He said no. Then he said he had just been tired. Then, after a long pause, he said Dennis had mentioned some things. I felt the floor shift slightly under me. I asked what things. Gregory said Dennis had seen Claire's car parked outside a particular apartment building on 3 separate occasions, not near the coffee shop, not near any store, an apartment building where a man from her old job apparently lived. Gregory said Dennis was just looking out for him. Gregory said he wasn't accusing anyone of anything. Gregory said he was sure it was nothing. His voice said something entirely different. I drove to Dennis's apartment that night. I stood in his kitchen and I asked him plainly what he was doing. He looked at me with those easy eyes of his and said he was worried about his brother. Said he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he saw something and said nothing. Said he cared about this family. I told him that caring about family meant being certain before you planted seeds of doubt in a man's mind about his pregnant wife. I told him that suspicion, once introduced, does not leave quietly. He nodded along and apologized and said, of course, I was right, he would say no more. He did not stop. By month 6, Gregory was sleeping in the guest room. He told Claire it was because her sleep was restless and he didn't want to disturb her. Claire told me this on the phone, her voice careful and confused, and I heard underneath the careful confusion a woman who already knew something was wrong and was not yet ready to name it. I told her to come over. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and she looked at me with those steady eyes of hers and said, Margaret, does Gregory think this baby isn't his? I did not lie to her. I said I thought Dennis had been putting ideas in Gregory's head and that I was going to handle it. She nodded slowly. She said, I have never been unfaithful to your son. Not once. Not a moment. I need you to know that. I told her I already knew. I did. I knew it the same way I had always known which of my sons was telling me the truth. Claire had no performance in her. What you saw was what was there. The baby came in February, a girl, which they had decided not to find out ahead of time. Claire labored for 11 hours, and Gregory was in the room for all of it, holding her hand in the mechanical, dutiful way of a man fulfilling an obligation rather than witnessing a miracle. The nurse told me later in the hallway that he had barely looked at the baby in the first hour. When I came in and held my granddaughter for the first time, I felt the particular fierce love that grandmothers feel, the kind that rearranges your priorities entirely and permanently. I looked at that small face and I thought, I will not let anyone hurt you. Not anyone. Gregory asked Claire for a paternity test when the baby was 3 days old. He did it in the hospital room. I was there. Claire's mother was there. Claire was sitting up in bed, still exhausted, still in the soft, bewildered state of new motherhood. And Gregory stood by the window with his arms crossed and said he needed to be sure. Claire's mother made a sound I will not forget. Claire herself went very quiet. Then Claire said in the same calm, steady voice she used for everything, okay, just that. Okay, not tears, not rage, not pleading. She looked at Gregory with clear eyes and said, okay, and I understood in that moment that she had been expecting this. She had been waiting for it. She had already decided how she was going to meet it. Gregory's certainty faltered slightly in the face of that calm. He had expected, I think, some reaction that would confirm his suspicion. Guilt tends to announce itself. Claire simply nodded at the nurse and asked what the process would be. Dennis was in the waiting room during all of this. He had come to the hospital, he said, to support his brother. He sat out there with a coffee and the particular restless energy of a man waiting for something he set in motion. The test was sent out. We were told 5 to 7 business days. Gregory went home the second night. Claire stayed with the baby and her mother stayed with her, and I drove home at 10 o'clock at night and sat in my car in my driveway for a long time before going inside. I made a decision that night. I was not going to wait for a test to tell my son what I already knew. I was going to find out exactly what Dennis had been doing, and I was going to lay it in front of Gregory before that envelope arrived. I started with the apartment building. I drove there one morning, and I sat in my car and I thought about what Dennis had claimed, that he had seen Claire's car there multiple times. I took out my phone and I called Claire and I asked her gently if she had ever had any reason to be near that building. She thought for a moment and then she said yes. Her physical therapist's office was 2 blocks away, and she had been going every 2 weeks throughout her pregnancy for a back issue she had mentioned to me once in passing, but apparently never to Gregory. She had parked in that area regularly. I called the physical therapist's office, I said I was confirming appointments for a patient. The receptionist, without asking too many questions, confirmed that yes, Claire had been a regular patient throughout her pregnancy. Bi-weekly visits. Every appointment documented. Dennis had known. He had to have known, or he had simply not looked hard enough because looking hard enough would have dismantled the story he was building. Either way, it was the same outcome. I went to Gregory next. I sat him down in his own living room and I put my phone on the coffee table with the physical therapist's address pulled up on the map, 2 blocks from the apartment building Dennis had been so concerned about. I told Gregory everything, the timeline of Dennis's comments, the pattern I had watched develop, the physical therapy appointments, the way Dennis had introduced each piece of information at exactly the right moment to do the most damage. Gregory sat very still while I talked. He was quiet for a long time afterward. Then he said, "Why would Dennis do that?" I had thought about this. I had thought about it for weeks, actually, turning it over and examining it from different angles the way you examine something you found at the bottom of a drawer, trying to understand why it is there at all. And what I kept coming back to was this. Dennis had borrowed money from Gregory twice in the past 2 years, significant amounts. And Gregory, with a baby coming and a house and a life that was growing in the direction of permanence and responsibility, had recently told Dennis there would be no more. Not unkindly, but clearly. I also thought about the way Dennis had always looked at Claire. Not with desire exactly, something older and uglier than that. The particular resentment of a person who watches someone have quietly and without apparent effort, the kind of life he has never been able to hold on to. I said to Gregory, "I think your brother is not who you believed him to be. And I think you owe your wife an apology that will take longer than an afternoon to deliver." The paternity results came back on a Thursday. Gregory drove to the house where Claire was staying with her mother, and he sat down and he opened the envelope and he read what it said. Claire watched him from across the room. The results confirmed what Claire had said and what I had known and what Gregory, and the part of himself that had not been poisoned by his brother's careful work, had probably known too. He wept. I was not there for this part, but Claire told me about it later in the matter-of-fact way she told me most things. She said he sat on her mother's sofa and cried in the way that men cry when they have done something they cannot undo and know it. She said she let him. She didn't reach for him. She just let him sit with what he had done. She said, "I told him that the question wasn't whether I was faithful. I was. The question was whether he knew me well enough to have never asked." Gregory confronted Dennis that same evening. I was not there for that either, but Gregory told me about it the next morning when he came to my house early, before I had made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table looking 10 years older than he had the week before. He said Dennis had not denied it, exactly. He had deflected, minimized, reframed, all the things Dennis was very good at. Said he was just being cautious. Said he couldn't have known about the physical therapist. Said he was just trying to look out for his brother. Gregory said he had listened to all of it, and then he had told Dennis to leave. Not just the conversation, his life. To stop calling, stop showing up, stop being the version of a brother that Gregory had apparently been carrying for years out of loyalty to a picture of a person who had never quite existed. I won't tell you that everything was repaired easily after that. It wasn't. Marriages don't bounce back from that kind of fracture the way we sometimes want them to in stories. Claire and Gregory went to counseling. There were months of difficult conversations, of trust being rebuilt, the slow way, of Gregory having to demonstrate over time, rather than just declare that he understood what he had done and chosen. But what I will tell you is this. My granddaughter is 18 months old now. Her name is Ruth. She has her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she does not yet understand any of what happened before she arrived in this world. She does not know that her father doubted her before he ever knew her, or that her uncle built a lie with the patience of someone who had nothing better to do, or that her grandmother drove to a parking lot and sat in a car at night and decided enough was enough. She only knows that when I come through the door, she reaches for me. She only knows the particular warmth of being held by people who love her without condition or question. Dennis called me once, about 4 months after everything came out. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was mostly about how things had gotten out of hand and how he had never intended for it to go so far and how he hoped we could all find a way to move forward as a family. I listened to it once, then I deleted it. There are things in this life you can rebuild and things you cannot. I know the difference now better than I ever wanted to. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is the thing Claire said to me the last time we talked about that period. We were in my backyard, Ruth asleep in the stroller between us, and Claire looked at me and said, "The hardest part wasn't Gregory doubting me. It was watching him choose to believe a story over a person he had stood next to every day for 3 years." She paused, and then she said, "People will always tell you stories. The question is whether you know the people in your life well enough to recognize when the story doesn't fit." I think about that a lot, about how well we actually know the people we share our lives with, about whether we are looking at them or only at what we expect to see, about how much damage can be done in the space between those two things. Ruth woke up while Claire was talking. She blinked at the afternoon sun, and then she looked at her mother and she smiled, the enormous, uncomplicated smile of a child who has no reason yet to be anything other than exactly where she is. And Claire smiled back, just like that. No hesitation, no residue, no weight from any of it. Just a mother and her daughter in the afternoon sun. That, I think, is what survival actually looks like. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just continuing with your whole heart toward the people who deserve it. If you've watched this far, thank you for spending this time with me today. These stories stay with me longer than I expect them to. If something in this one stays with you too, I hope it's that. Know your people. Really know them. And when someone tries to hand you a story that doesn't fit the person you know, look a little closer before you believe it. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.